The Game of Thrones franchise right now is honestly entering its most insane era, because even though the original series ended back in 2019, HBO is not slowing down for even a second. If anything, they're treating Westeros like their biggest cinematic universe, because the amount of spin-offs they're building is wild. House of the Dragon is still the main flagman, Season 3 is officially lined up for summer, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is already airing right now with its first season, giving fans that smaller, more grounded vibe, but at the same time, HBO is still quietly stacking projects in the background that could end up being even bigger than anything we've seen so far. And one of those projects, may be the most important one in the entire lore if they actually pull it off, is AEGON'S Conquest. Because this is not just another side story, this is literally the origin point of the entire Iron Throne era. This is the moment Westeros changes forever. This is the story of Aegon Targaryen arriving on the mainland with Visenya and Rhaenys, his two sister wives, and 3 giant dragons, and basically doing what no army in history could ever do, reshaping the entire continent through fire and conquest. We're talking about events set roughly 300 years before Game of Thrones. This is pure mythology. This is the beginning of the legend. And what's crazy is that now we're finally getting signs that this project is moving forward in a real way, because the writer attached to it, Mattson Tomlin, just dropped an update that fans instantly locked onto. He posted on X that it's always satisfying to finish filling a notebook, and he shared a photo of multiple notebooks, and among them you can literally spot one marked with a draft title that basically screams Conquest. That's not some random post. That's a real indicator that writing is happening, that scripts are being built, that structure is forming. That's not executives talking about an idea, that's a writer sitting down and actually putting in the work. And the important part is that this isn't even the first time Tomlin has hinted that he's deep into this. Back in August, he was answering fan questions and straight up said he's done a lot of writing already on Aegon's Conquest. So this has been cooking behind the scenes for months, maybe longer, and now seeing 2 notebooks full of material basically confirms that progress is serious. But what makes Aegon's Conquest so fascinating compared to the other spin-offs is that it's also the most unusual adaptation HBO has ever tried in this world. Game of Thrones had thousands of pages from A Song of Ice and Fire. House of the Dragon is adapting Fire and Blood. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is pulling directly from the Dunk and Egg novellas. Those projects have roadmaps, they have detailed narratives. Aegon's Conquest doesn't. This is basically adapting history. Fire and Blood gives you the broad strokes, the key events, who was conquered, who died, who survived, what castles burned, what kingdoms fell, but what it doesn't give you is the emotional context. It doesn't give you private conversations. It doesn't tell you what Aegon actually said when he stood over the ruins of Harrenhal. It doesn't tell you what Visenya felt when she realized fear was the true weapon. It doesn't tell you what it was like for entire families and dynasties to watch dragons blot out the sky, and Mattson Tomlin even talked about this during an Entertainment Weekly interview where he explained that writing Aegon is less like writing a fantasy protagonist and more like writing Napoleon or Alexander the Great. Because it's the same situation. We know what happened historically, we know the outcomes, but the job is to fill in the humanity, the themes, the emotions, the atmosphere, and turn it into a living drama. And of course, George Martin is still heavily involved here, which matters a lot because Martin has been very vocal about wanting these stories treated like real history inside the world, not just random fan service. He's been working closely with Tomlin, doing a lot of back and forth, shaping what this conquest should feel like. And then we got another massive detail just recently when Martin spoke in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter, the same interview where he also mentioned that his relationship with House of the Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal has basically collapsed, which is its own drama, but the key thing is what he revealed about Aegon's Conquest. Martin said HBO currently has 2 possible plans for how this project could actually hit screens. One is the obvious approach, a traditional series with 8 to 10 episodes. But the second option is the one that instantly made fans lose their minds, because Martin said there's also an idea floating around to make Aegon's Conquest a massive theatrical movie event, something on the scale of Dune. And honestly, I'm gonna say it straight up, that is exactly what they should do. Personally, I do not want Aegon's Conquest to just be another miniseries. This is the one story in the entire lore that deserves the biggest cinematic treatment possible. This is not a small-scale political drama. This is dragons reshaping continents. This is the birth of the Iron Throne. This is the moment Westeros becomes Westeros. If Warner's and HBO are smart, they make this a 3-hour epic, and realistically, not even just one film. This conquest is enormous. There are too many kingdoms, too many battles, too many legendary moments to cram into 8 episodes. This could easily be a 2-part saga, maybe even a full trilogy if they commit. Now for my take on all this, I really think they should go the feature movie route. Not just one movie either, but make it a proper 3-hour epic, maybe even a trilogy if they want to do it justice. The scope of what happened during the Conquest is absolutely massive. You've got Aegon starting as a prince on Dragonstone, the actual campaigns across Westeros, the Field of Fire, the submission of the North, Dorne refusing to bend the knee. There's so much material that could be covered, and splitting it across multiple films released over a few years would be the ideal way to handle it. HBO could use this to test a completely different strategy too. Ignoring theatrical releases for something this big would honestly be a massive mistake. Game of Thrones is a multi-million franchise that could bring in serious cash from a global theatrical run. We're talking massive special effects, huge set pieces, the kind of scale that demands the biggest screens possible. Martin himself compared it to Dune, and yeah, that's the right comparison. This would let Game of Thrones break out beyond the TV format and become something even bigger. Think about what we'd actually see on screen. This is one of the most significant events in the entire lore of A Song of Ice and Fire. We'd finally get to see Balerion in action, who was the absolute largest dragon that ever lived. Why wouldn't you want to see that on the biggest screens possible? Especially now with the Netflix and Warner Brothers merger happening, and the news that Netflix wants to do 45-day theatrical windows for DC films and 30-day windows for other major releases. The timing actually works out perfectly for an AEGON'S CONQUEST theatrical release. A movie trilogy released over several years would be perfect. You could pack in massive flashbacks showing the doom of Valyria, how the Targaryens and Valerians escaped. You could show Aegon's childhood, how he grew up as a prince on Dragonstone, the raising of the dragons. Make it a slower-paced epic with tons of action and conquest. Every Game of Thrones fan would go absolutely nuts for this. What makes this even better is that it would work as a prequel to everything. It comes before House of the Dragon, before all the current shows. New audiences who never watched Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon could walk into a theater and experience the story of the first king of Westeros. If it hooks them, they'd go home and start watching the shows. Game of Thrones mentions Aegon constantly. House of the Dragon references him all the time. Seeing it on the big screen just makes sense. Obviously, there are tons of fan casts floating around already. People love throwing Henry Cavill's name at every fantasy role that comes up. But knowing HBO's approach of casting relatively unknown actors for these roles, I think that's actually the better way to go. Find talented British actors who haven't blown up yet. One fan cast I've seen that might actually work is Harry Goodwin as Aegon, but beyond that, I'm not really interested in guessing. HBO can't even decide if this should be a film or a series yet, so casting speculation feels premature. But the fact that Matts and Tomlin just posted those early drafts and teased that the initial work is done matters though. There are so many events and characters involved in the Conquest that this really needs to be an epic. George Martin was heavily inspired by Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings when he wrote A Song of Ice and Fire. Imagine if Aegon's Conquest became a massive trilogy and stood alongside the greatest fantasy trilogies of all time. Game of Thrones could leave a legacy in the industry where people genuinely rewatch these films for decades. I feel like Game of Thrones is missing a theatrical film to really cement its place as the absolute king of this genre. The show will always be the show, people will keep rewatching it and arguing about season 8 forever. More spin-offs are coming, they've even talked about a sequel series following Arya. Let all that stuff live on streaming, but Aegon's Conquest should be huge. Give it at least a 30-day theatrical window, then put it on HBO afterwards. This would bring in tons of money and pull in new audiences who never experienced Game of Thrones before. They'd see the events that started everything, and that would genuinely be incredible.